Welcome to the Leaders Who Last podcast. Real talk, real leaders. We hit on strategy, people, and health, where sustainable performance lives. Each episode brings honest conversations, research-based insights, and practical tools to help you lead well and long in a complex world that is not slowing down. Here are your co-hosts, Mary Axelsen, leadership strategist and transformation expert, and founder and CEO of WeMax Consulting, where she helps dynamic organizations and leaders reach their fullest potential. And Dr. Kristin Tugman, CEO of Tugman Consulting and a leading expert in disability psychology and return to work strategy. For more than 2 decades, she's helped organizations reduce absence, strengthen well-being, and create cultures where people can thrive. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to Leaders Who Last. Real leaders, real talk. We hit on strategy, people, and health, where sustainable performance lives. We are your co-hosts, Mary Axelsen.
And I'm Kristin Tugman.
Today, we're talking about leading equity under pressure, risk, power, and the future of inclusive leadership. Budgets are getting cut, language is getting scrubbed from strategies, and in some organizations, diversity data is completely disappearing.
Yeah, and I think it'd be no shock to anybody to hear me say that I am just saddened and frankly disgusted that we're even having to have this conversation in the way that we're having to have it. But I mean, we couldn't really afford for inclusivity and equity to backslide. I mean, women's representation in senior leadership has taken a hit over even just the last couple of years. And this is pre the administration telling us that diversity, equity, and inclusion is wrong. Women of color still face the steepest climb. For example, Latinas and Black women hold only about 1% of the C-suite roles, and they experience the biggest drop-offs on the way up. And as we are seeing companies quietly or frankly loudly back away from diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and that just causes burnout. It causes more stress, and it's taking a significant toll on our mental health and the psychological safety of the workforce.
So to stay aligned with who we are, we're going to keep it real. Our focus today is to name what's really happening and get practical about what leaders can actually do when equity is under pressure, frankly, under attack. So we'll understand why leading with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is controversial right now, on how it's impacting people and performance, and learn concrete ways to keep equity moving. So you will walk away with one strategy move, a health check, and a power sharing action that you can do immediately.
Excellent. So to ground us, we are joined by my good friends Trish Payne and Courtney Johnson from Atlanta Life Insurance Company. Atlanta Life Insurance Company is the first Black-owned insurance company, and they have a rich history in the civil rights movement. They built their identity around economic equity, and I am lucky enough to be able to partner with them in my work in Tugman Consulting. So Courtney and Trish, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
We're thrilled to be here and part of the discussion.
So can you guys just do me a favor and introduce yourself briefly and give us the history of Atlanta Life Insurance Company?
All right. Well, I will kick us off. I am Trish Payne, and by way of introduction and background, I have been in this employee benefits space for a very long time. Atlanta Life is a life insurance company that was founded really on the premise of providing access and protection to underserved populations. And so as part of my journey in this employee benefit industry, having worked for 2 very large carriers, it was quite an amazing opportunity to be able to shift in the moment in my career to be a part of an organization that looked to provide impact and opportunity for those that needed them most. So it's been an honor to be part of this organization. Courtney?
So I am Courtney Johnson, and I too have been in the insurance industry and experience for a long time. Trish said for a very long time, but over 25 years. I'm not afraid to put the number out there, but very excited to be here at Atlanta Life and knowing that Atlanta Life is the only remaining Black-owned financial institution from the 1900s. It's important for us that we continue to lean into the legacy and the foundation of the company. I'm so excited to share more about Atlanta Life and impactful moments that the company has had and some of the future impactful moments and current impactful moments that the company is having.
So with that, do you guys mind just sharing the founding story?
Absolutely. Love to tell the story. Atlanta Life was founded in 1905 by a gentleman by the name of Alonzo Herndon. Alonzo Herndon was born an enslaved man in rural Georgia. And at emancipation, he took up the trade of barbering, along with a couple of other things, bartering and so forth. But it was really barbering that allowed him to really move from rural Georgia into Atlanta and really establish himself as a businessman and an entrepreneur. He opened up a barber shop. One became three barbershops. And he also
Mm.
had a real estate portfolio, which back in 1905 was unheard of for a Black man to be able to really accomplish any of this type of wealth. At the time, he and in the community knew that Black people in 1905 were not insurable. We were, in fact, the commodity. And so, because of this, he learned of a failing mutual company, leveraged his fortune to purchase this company, which became Atlanta Life Insurance Company. Our company was really founded on the traditional kind of door to door individual salesman that knocked on doors, collected premiums, and also had a very strong economic movement in the community as well, providing jobs, providing access, and just real economic opportunity for people of color that needed it most. We were instrumental in things that were happening at the time, such as the civil rights movement, like Courtney mentioned. And much more than just a life insurance company, but truly a company that looked to provide outcome impact, right, and opportunity for people of color. Fast forward to, kind of acquisition, and we've left a lot out that I know that we're going to get into during the discussion, but I will fast forward to acquisition and turn it over to Courtney to speak on that piece.
So in 2023, as a company, we call ourselves a 120-year-old startup because we truly are starting from scratch. We want to make sure there's current policies in place, but being also current and being meaningful with solutions that we're bringing to the space. We partner with insurance carriers, which is the best part, but then also allows us to bring in some unique solutions like Tugman Consultant and a few other point solutions that we're bringing in as well. So that's how we got here, and that's how we are here today.
Oh, we really love the story. So tell us a little bit about the risks that the leaders took back then and how those choices shaped the business.
I'll start with telling a little bit of the story from Henrietta. So we had a legacy brunch. Because the company has been around for some time, 120 years, there's not a lot of individuals that are left that actually used to work at the company, of course. But we did find a few individuals that were in their 80s and in their 90s that were willing to come in and tell us quite a bit about the history, just how impactful the company was from a civil rights perspective, even from the foundation of the NAACP as well. But Henrietta came in and she mentioned to us and told us all about the leadership and how supportive the previous CEO was of her going in and marching and protesting and being in part of a lot of political things in Atlanta. The story that she tells, which I will not be able to do justice, and hopefully one day we'll be able to all meet her and record the story. But she tells about how, they went down to protest a certain individual and a certain mayor at the time that they had all supported and got into place. And how when they went into protest, they were hoping that it was going to be a lot of people, but it ended up being just 4 to 6 people that showed up and protested. So the next day they were a little discouraged. But they decided to go down and go back and do it again and protest again. And on that track and on that way to go protest, one of the individuals said, "Hey, I need to stop into this radio station and pick up something." And in that conversation and in that stop, the radio person somehow asked Henrietta, "Would you be on the radio and talk about why you're protesting?" And sure enough, she's very vocal, and she's still very vocal. She gets on the radio and talks about just the importance of us coming together and the importance of voting and the importance of making sure everyone is educated and supporting community growth and equity and economic development. So as she's protesting and talking about this on the radio station, and of course she's a representative of Atlanta Life, one of the things that I found interesting was that she was a senior vice president. And a vice president as a Black woman in that time, it's something that's not talked about ever. And so she didn't mention any of things about her title. She mentioned all about the actions and the impact that she was having. But in that protest as a representative of Atlanta Life, she went back to work the next day. The CEO was like, "What did you do?" Why am I now being flooded with all these phone calls about Atlanta Life? What has been said on the radio? And why does the mayor now want to meet with us again? But he supported her. He supported quite a few of the individuals that always protested. And Atlanta Life had that history of bailing people out for civil rights, bailing people out if they were arrested. She tells some of the stories of how bad it really was. She kind of alluded to some of the politics and the pieces that people did in order to try to make them not protest. But it's been good to hear the history and the struggles that individuals had back in the day, which right now is not even back in the day, but just around the corner.
I think what makes that so pivotal in today's time is the fact that you had individuals like a Henrietta, right? That her voice, she was willing to exercise her voice, and she was not shy about it, right? She basically believed in what she stood for, and she was surrounded by leadership in an organization that supported her speaking out about what she saw with the belief that she could make a difference. And I think that that's what's needed even today, right? Like when you think about Alonzo Herndon, he was one of the founding members, and I actually took some notes of called the Niagara Movement. That was in 1905. And that was an early civil rights group that preceded and influenced the NAACP that promoted, Black political and social advocacy. You had organizations and other Black founded organizations at the time that understood the value and the economic power that was attached to influencing change, right? And how to leverage that. But then also to that end would truly empower their employees to dig in and get involved, also setting up that infrastructure to help their employees and help members in their community to drive change. And so that's clearly a void of what we're seeing today with organizations that have kind of stepped back with the idea that they really don't want to become that target. But, I think, frankly, we need more Henriettas and we need more organizations that are willing to stand firm in their beliefs. If we're going to see any type of change, we're definitely in that pivotal moment now where we need a lot more Henriettas.
Trish and Courtney, there's so many lessons that we can take away from what you just shared. So first of all, I think we often hear, I'm only one person. What difference can I make? And the fact that you had Henrietta, one person, right? I'm sure there was some fear as she stood with such bravery and was courageous and also humility. And then you had 3 or 4 people, as far as a protest is concerned. And that small groups, small actions can make a big, huge difference. And so I really want our audience right now to, Kristin and I focus on giving you hot takes. And this is a hot take right here. One person, a small group of people can make a difference and have a meaningful impact.
Definitely.
Absolutely. I remember that day, and for me in particular, I just remember thinking, wow, thank you, because I needed to hear that. I needed to hear that 4 to 6 people can make a difference because of where we are today. So speaking of today, let's fast forward to today. And it's definitely stating the obvious, but I think we need to continue to emphasize what is it that we are losing when we back away from diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So I'd ask you, Courtney or Trish, to kind of jump on that question. What are we missing? What are we going to lose as this becomes more pervasive?
Right. So DEI, remember back a few years ago where diversity, equity, inclusion was a whole movement, right, for organizations. And the premise was that it was not only the right thing to do, but it was also a business imperative. And that has not changed. Atlanta Life exists because equitable access to financial security did not. And inclusion for us isn't an initiative, right? It's the reason why we're here. So when you think about innovation, when you think about being able to provide resource and opportunity, ideas, all of the things that help organizations thrive is because of diversity and inclusion, right? Diversity of thought. all of those things that help organizations to thrive and help their bottom line still hold true today. And so, from an underlying kind of business imperative, an organization have done in tons of research then and even now, nothing's changed. Absolutely nothing has changed. I think, unfortunately, organizations have seen the consequence, right, of stripping just 3 words from their vernacular or from their organizations and even kind of stepping away from supporting those things. And I think we'll continue to see more of that. But we know for organizations that are diverse and embrace inclusion and belonging, they do perform well. They provide safe spaces for employees to bring their authentic selves to work that ultimately result in the organization performing better. And so, as a business imperative, DEI is exceptionally important to our business as well as employees overall.
So, what I loved, again, I hear so explicitly in your story is that Atlanta Life has a people, human, and a business strategy, right? That you're clear about who you're serving and why. You care about the people that you employ, and you actually see the need and you execute on that. All at while you keep your values still center and core of who you are. To me, another hot take for our audience, where are you sitting in your values and how are you using that to inform both your people and your business strategies? I had a situation myself where I was working with a prospect, a potential client, partnering with them on building out a people strategy for their business. They had experienced an incredible amount of growth in a short period of time. And in the center of the strategy, I had the words equity. And he did not understand why the words equity were in the people strategy. And he said, we don't have to do any work around that. We already have representation. And I'm like, well, that's great. Okay. That's a good place to start. But representation does not necessarily mean equity. So I would want to look at where people are sitting as far as roles are concerned, where are people sitting as far as compensation and promotions. And he was completely against that. And did not want to do that type of work. So I had a choice to make in that moment about whether that was someone I wanted to do business with or not. Was this individual aligning with my values? Did I think my company could have the kind of impact that we want to have? And my decision was I walked away. So I do think that we're in tough times right now about when we're in moments and we have to make decisions and choices about how do we navigate through individual situations as well as business opportunities. And I know the three of you have had a recent experience where that actually played out. So maybe you could tell our audience a bit
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. I mean, I can start. So we were at a conference in the South about a month ago, and it was a good conference, actually. It was a good, really interesting topic. I was doing a keynote, which was like the way it was structured, just so you're aware. It was like I did 15 minutes, and then there was 4 speakers after me, and then we did an Ask the Experts panel. And so mine was just on the healthcare crisis and the fact that ancillary benefits need to innovate in order to remain relevant to have an impact on said healthcare crisis. And so it was really sort of pushing the industry to make some changes in this particular environment. But then I was going to be on this panel of Ask the Experts. If you know me at all, you know the time left is the time needed as I'm preparing. And so I'm sitting outside the room and I get the questions for the panel, like in the 11th hour. And so I'm reading through them. And just as I'm doing that, Trish and Courtney are walking up. And I read this question and it says, how is Atlanta Life Insurance Company managing through its value proposition around serving underserved communities in this environment? And so I finish reading it. And I look up at them and I say, oh, hi, here's this question. How do you want me to handle it? And because I'm representing Atlanta Life Insurance Company for this presentation. And so that's the point at which we, and really Trish and Courtney, had to make a decision for how we were going to show up. And so I would ask you two then what was going through your mind when I asked you that question.
I think Trish and I are always the same and always aligned because, we're twin brain all the time. So we were like, tell a story, be honest, don't hold back. I think in that moment we were like, well, of course, nonchalantly, like, we'll just tell a story. Like, it's our story. Our story isn't changing. You can't make it any different. And that's who we are. That's who the company is. So, tell as much of it as you want to, from Alonzo Herndon being enslaved to being the only remaining Black only financial institution from the 1900s. I think the part that I love the most is that the history, the story, and you chose to tell it all.
Yeah. So that was like, and I think for you guys, it seemed like it was a visceral reaction. And I think all three of us were like, well, yeah, I mean, of course, we're going to be who we are. And so then the panel happens, and just to set the stage, right? It's so interesting. There was two brown men. The moderator was a brown man, me, and then a white guy, a middle-aged white guy, insurance executive. I got a vibe the second that I met him with how strong he shook my hand, and I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting. And I'm excited yet nervous about the question coming because I know it's going to be interesting. So the question comes, and I decide that yes, I'm going to tell the full story because the audience doesn't know the Atlanta Life story. So I turn to the audience to engage them, and I can't really see him out of the corner of my eye. Trish and Courtney say that he got really uncomfortable the second that I said Alonzo Herndon was born into slavery. So the second I said slavery, he became uncomfortable, right? Hot take. If you become uncomfortable around the word slavery, I mean, you might be racist. That's all I'm saying. So I'm thinking, okay, let's, so I'm telling the story, and the audience is definitely engaged. And and then I say, but we have to call out the elephant in the room in terms of the pressure that Atlanta Life Insurance Company is facing today. We have to decide as an industry how we want to continue to show up. How are we going to continue to create products that do meet the needs of the underserved population? How are we going to align with our values and ensure that just because the administration tells us that we can't say words like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and words like women, and words like underserved, how are we still going to show up? And so he jumps in and says, I don't understand why you need to make this conversation political. And this has nothing to do with race. And so in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, wow, this has never happened before. I think this guy's going to argue with me. And wow, what type of position is he willing to take in front of all of these people? And he continues and says, we've tried to engage this population. And he goes, it's really just about middle America. It has nothing to do with race. And middle America doesn't get it. And so I did at that moment start to have a bit of an out of body experience where I'm thinking, where how like you're talking and then, but you're not really, half your brain is like, wow, I can't believe this is happening right now, but the words are still coming out of my mouth. And I do remember saying, and I was glancing back at Courtney and Trish the whole time, and I said, well, I do think it is about race and the underserved population. And we do have an obligation. If we've provided products that aren't meeting their needs, haven't we failed them? And I remember saying that. And then he pushed back again and said to me, well, what products would you offer them? And I remember it's almost like, too, there was this intersection of defending diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also there was some misogyny, certainly, that was coming forward, and me as a woman feeling like I was battling this, feeling like I was doing something wrong or that I needed to answer his question. And what made me really proud of myself was I realized in my out of body experience that I did not need to answer his question. And so I pushed back to him to say, it's up to you to determine what products are going to meet the needs of the underserved population. And I choose to continue to align with my values and work in customers and employers that align with my values. And again, there's so much that I don't even remember that I said. And I would turn it back to Courtney and Trish to kind of add on to the story, and what was going through your mind while that was happening.
Yeah, no, you totally handled it. I mean, so impressive. And as Courtney and I were kind of looking at each other, looking at you, full transparency, like I too was kind of feeling, you just start to kind of feel warm from the feet and just takes his way all the way up. And I'm like, he's gonna go there. He went there, And so I think I personally was very shocked about how emboldened he was to be so explicit, right, in his position around, the idea of not making it political, but that's the very thing that he did, right? There was no part of the discussion that was political. The whole premise of the conversation was around innovation. And so the discussion that happened prior to put tons of stats around an entire population that is either underserved, so underinsured, or not insured at all. And so the whole premise of the conversation is, what are we going to do about that? Right. And so taking from that part of the conversation and then into the panel discussion and really kind of leaning into the Atlanta Life story and the fact that, yeah, our entire organization was built on providing access for those that didn't have it, really kind of tied in very nicely to that underserved population. And so, as an industry, what are we going to do about that? And I felt like the example that you gave from a long term care perspective really spoke volumes when you talk about affordability and accessibility, right? And that applies to everyone right now. It's just not something that is non existent, and there's a need for it. And we as an industry need to figure that out. And so I think, like you, KT, when you said, okay, well, like no part of this had anything to do with race, but clearly, like, I thought, well, that's a trigger for you, right? Like that was the initial thing that I thought is, oh my gosh, she's triggered, right? And how do we respond to that? And in that moment, I was exceptionally appreciative and so proud of you, right? For really kind of standing firm in your beliefs like we knew you would, and thought, my gosh, I'm glad that KT is the one up here answering this question because I just don't know if I would have handled it with as much grace.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know, just as much grace as you did. And yeah, I mean, Courtney, what would you add to that?
That's the part that I was in the moment thinking. Full transparency, I was also looking at the two brown men to say, are you going to say something? Are you going
Right.
to speak into the data and the facts that you just displayed 5 minutes ago? You have the data, you have the information. And one of the individuals did. He tried to allude to his company doing some things from a diversity perspective and the diverse titles and marketing campaign that they have, and they do. But it just wasn't enough. Like, you were standing in the facts of history. You were standing in the facts of, like, this is the reality. And this is the point that we all are in where we need to decide, are we going to live in what type of America? And you said, are we going to live in a white America? And I think that's also when his hands started flailing and face
Wow.
turned even more red.
Yeah.
But that is the reality. Like, I think the piece that bothers me the most around, the current times is that people aren't looking at the facts. These are facts. These aren't feelings. These numbers are real. So if you don't want to live into what we're feeling, then fine, look at the data. And I was very, very proud in you standing in the history, but also disappointed in the brown men not defending the numbers and the stats that they had just presented.
Yeah. And I think what made it uncomfortable for them is the fact that he did turn it into a racially based conversation, right? When again, at the end of the day, if you look at the data, this has nothing to do with race. Like, it all comes back down to there is an entire socioeconomic population that does not have access. They don't just look like us. They actually look like you, Mary and KT, too. Right. And so I would actually say that in some areas of the US, they look more like you than they do us.
100%.
Let's just be honest about what it is, right? But folks are not ready for that conversation, right? And so I think we do need to take it back to data. We do need to take it back to facts. You need to remove emotion and all of the other things out of the equation. And it's about providing those innovative solutions, frankly, that DEI will help close the gap for.
Well, that's the thing with diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Like, because we had made so much progress to the point where we were saying, like, let's think about all the people that need something in order to be included in the workforce, right? So it's somebody who has an adolescent who has a mental health condition who needs to make sure that they have time away from work to care for their child. It's somebody who has an aging parent and they need to figure out how to be a caregiver effectively. Somebody who has a spouse who has an illness, right? So it's like the only people that don't need something in the workforce in order to be able to bring their whole self to work is a white, cisgender, heterosexual man who is young enough that doesn't have children, doesn't have an aging parent, and is unmarried, right?
And is in
So,
the upper class, like, also has to
right,
have some sort of wealth, the economic piece too.
right.
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah,
just such a needed discussion.
and I want to say to the three of you, first of all, first, thank you for sharing that experience. And it is an example of what we mean when we say equity is under fire. Because where you started this conversation, you started with looking at each other and saying, can we tell our founding story? So when did telling our stories become a risk? Okay? That's the conversation you had to have, like telling our, which is facts. These are facts. This is how we started, right? When did showing data that shows the need, right, in the underrepresentation right now, and the fact that there are millions of people who do not have access to the insurance that they need, when did that become a risk? When did telling your story, sharing data, identifying the need become political? Right? Because the conversation went political.
Right.
And so you're up there having a business conversation about how do we get more insurance to those they needed. And I went all different routes, right? Because telling a story, sharing data, talking about a need, talking about who to serve became equity under fire. It became a risk. Right. So we have a big decision happening right now. So let's take it political for a second. All right. And the fact that we have primaries going on right now. And I feel like I have a real responsibility to do my due diligence and my research as far as candidates are concerned. And to me, it doesn't even matter what I'm registered as far as a voter is concerned. It's not necessarily about party line for me, but it is about the person and their belief system and where do they see as the path forward and what are they considering to be risks and what are they willing to have a conversation about. We have somebody who's a registered Democrat right now and I could easily say, oh, I'm going to vote for that person because the person's a Democrat. But I can say to you, I don't know if I'm going to vote for that person because when I look down on the beliefs and what that person is willing to stand for and the risk and the courage they're bringing to the conversation, I need to make sure that it's aligned with what I want to see from a greater good perspective, but also in our businesses, because these political decisions that we're making do impact our businesses. And guess what? They show up on a panel discussion when you're
Indeed.
talking about insurance and products and who to serve.
Right. Yeah. It's tough to I feel like we compartmentalize too much about, the candidate being, to your point, a particular member of a party, and we set aside their values, that clearly their actions, right? You behave based on your values. I'll say that forever. You behave based on your values. And so if the behavior is such that I can't morally align with it, I mean, it's just a sad environment in which we are in, that we're having to make those choices where we have to say the words, the lesser of two evils.
So let's help our leaders out and let's move to our strategy move, our health check in, and our power sharing moment. So I'll kick us off with the strategy move. Earlier, I talked about the client that I had, was considering and the fact that he didn't want to have equity in the people strategy. So what I will say to you is regardless of the words, there are actions and there is analysis and data that you can use to help you make decisions. So, a first place to start, yes, you can look at representation. What does my workforce look like? And you can look at a variety of different identities, whether that's age, race, gender, identity, orientation. A lot of times when companies are first starting out, they'll start and they'll look at race and gender as the first identities to get. And then where is that representation sitting? Right? Do you have a certain population that's more in the entry level? And then as you start to move up, does representation start to change to a particular identity? For example, white male. The Lean In organization, along with McKinsey, they do a study every year where they look at gender and race and what representation looks like. And last year, we actually went backwards as far as representation is concerned with Black women in senior leader roles, right? So it's an and then based upon what your data is showing you, identify one or two actions that you want to take so that you can start to have more equity in your representation. So you could look at just the layers within our organization, that hierarchy. Where are we sitting from a representation? And what are one or two actions that we could take so that we start having more of an equitable representation in our organization? So, Kristin, I'll turn it over to you for the health check-in.
Health check-in. So it's a really tough environment, folks. Again, I talked about intersectionality. So probably the only folks that aren't bothered are your cisgender, heterosexual, white young men. So your workforce is struggling, most likely. Women, anyone of color. It's Pride Month right now. I don't know if we'll get this out before the end of Pride Month, but the LGBTQ community is struggling because of the environment. And so listening sessions are really important. If folks can just vent and feel like they're heard and validated, you don't have to solve it, because I don't know if we can solve it. But I would say, think about how you have, as a leader, shown up, and have you been afraid to say certain words? Have you been holding back? And sort of evaluate, and then have a listening session with your team. Be candid, be vulnerable, and just allow them to have a safe space to talk and to feel heard and to feel like they can, in fact, bring their whole self to work. It will change your perspective. Listening sessions have changed my perspective over the years. I promise you, you'll learn something, but you'll build some loyalty, and you'll allow your team to exhale in a way that will have at least some positive impact on their mental health, I promise.
Yeah, I love that, Kristin, because that also can feed into the strategy move as well. When you listen to your employees and they tell you what's going on and what they need, they also a lot of times will give you the actions that you can take to create the movement. The other thing that I like about what you just talked about is vulnerability and normalizing vulnerability, and also normalizing discomfort. What we're talking about is uncomfortable, and it is okay to be uncomfortable. It is okay to be scared and brave at the same time. So, listening sessions allow for that normalization around discomfort, and allowing you to feel a bit more comfortable and step into some difficult conversations. So, Courtney and Trish, we're gonna parlay over to you. Have you give one power move that our leaders could take?
I was going to double down on really what you said, KT, about intentionally including voices and perspectives, right? And intentionality around that, but then also creating a space where folks are invited to do just that. When you think about normalizing discomfort, there are a whole group of folks out there that can care less about our comfort. I mean, I think that the conversation that we had about what we experienced at the conference is a perfect example, right? He could care less about our discomfort. He's kind of rooted in his beliefs and his values, and he was not afraid to articulate that. And I think we need to create a space where we can all thrive, right? In voicing how we feel, what our perspectives are, and what our experiences are. And I think the byproduct of that is inclusion and belonging. And I think that if we just organically create spaces for that, we don't need your words. We don't need for you to put in DEI. They're words. Actions, as they say, speak louder than words. So whether you put it in or you strip it from your manual or not, as long as we create the environment that facilitates that, we'll get the outcomes that we're looking for.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Courtney, anything you want to add?
I said continue to live into the facts, the reality of data, reality of the world as it is today. I'm in South Carolina, so I have to say Cyrus Belton. I think knowing that things are still happening in the world, being killed, and our justice system kind of is still defending the attacker. I feel like we have to continue to live into the facts of that reality is still present and history is still present today. It's not gone that far. As I mentioned, it's around the corner, but for some of us, it's still kind of at our doorstep. So I would just say continue to, as a leader, live into those listening sessions, but also lead into actions and making sure your employees feel heard and have an opportunity to have a moment to be in their feelings as things are occurring. So think that's a piece.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you so much to the both of you for being here. And I know that our listeners are going to benefit so much from your voice, from your bravery, from your stories, from the data that you have shared with us. So, in closing, leaders who last don't wait for controversy to cool down. They lead through it with clarity on equity, care for their people, and have an eye on sustainable performance. Again, we have loved this conversation. Thank you, Courtney and Trish, and we look forward to our next episode.
We just love this conversation, and I hope that you, as the audience, get as much out of this conversation as we did. And we look forward to talking to you next time. So thank you for listening.
Go vote.
Yes. Go
Yes.
vote.
All right.
Thank you.